Hello, good evening everyone. A warm welcome. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you very much also MJ Akbar and Joseph Caron for agreeing to do this talk today. I'm in a thanking mood. Not that I'm an ungrateful wretch usually, but it's just that it's a special honor to have someone like MJ visit us. Equally heartwarming is the support of several individuals and institutions in Vancouver who've extended a warm welcome to MJ and to Indian Summer. And I'd first like to recognize a very important relationship, and that's our partnership with Simon Fraser University. Not only is the Goldcorp Center for the Arts, where we are right now, the festival hub, SFU is also a presenting partner of the festival, and we're very happy to have this relationship. I see Philip Steenkamp, the Vice President External, in the audience. Thanks, Philip, for being here. We have some ministers with us tonight, Minister Y. Young and Minister John Carmichael, Ministers of Parliament who've joined us, and we have received support from the Government of Canada, so I'd like to thank and acknowledge them as well. This particular talk is made possible by the support of certain people. Generous support from Sandy Garosino. Sandy is an active member of the Vancouver arts and political community, and she's also amazing. So thanks, Sandy. The Institute of Asian Research at UBC is another of tonight's sponsors. Paul Evans, its director, is here tonight, and Paul I consider a bridge between Canada and India and South Asia, in fact, and not just because his son once starred in a Bollywood film. The Canada-India Foundation have also helped. Thanks for your support, Barj Dahan, Sarup Man, thank you very much for helping us, and Thai Vancouver. This is a relationship that is now in its second year, and they're so active in the city, and the wonderful partners, so I thank you for being on board again. And finally, special thanks once more to Sukesh Kumar of KPMG for hosting us. One of the important things of the festival is we really see it as a place where old friends meet and new ones are made. So being able to mingle over food and drink is a wonderful thing. Thanks, KPMG. I'd now like to invite Sandy Garosino to come on and introduce the speakers.
Our world will never again be defined on the geopolitical terms as it was in the centuries before. Never again will it be defined by mountains, rivers, shorelines. More and more, from forever now, it will be defined by relationships, by communities that span the globe. It's therefore incredibly important for all of us to become conversant in the global conversation, to be part of the global dialogue, so that we as informed citizens can help to direct our own fate and to take part in the global conversation. And that's one of the purposes of Indian Summer. It's one of the reasons I'm so proud to support this event and this festival, and Sirish and Laura and the entire organization. We are deeply honored and very proud to present this evening one of the world's preeminent observers of the Indian subcontinent and the Islamic world, Mr. MJ Akbar. He is a journalist, editor, author, politician, historian. He's been at the helm of India's most respected publications and is the editorial director of India Today, which has a weekly readership of some 15 million. And as well as Headlines Today, which is India's leading television news channel. He also writes for international newspapers such as the Washington Post and the Guardian. He's a former member of the Indian Parliament and a speaker at the Canadian Parliament Standing Commission on Foreign Affairs and International Trade in 2003 and at the Halifax Security Council in 2011. He is the author of several best-selling books, including the recent Tinderbox, the story of Pakistan. He is joined on this stage by, and we are so fortunate again to have Monsieur Joseph Caron, who has spent almost 40 years connecting Canada to Asia and serving as ambassador to the People's Republic of China, to Japan, and he has served as in that capacity to North Korea, to Nepal, Bhutan, and most recently as High Commissioner to India for Canada. He's the recipient of 2 honorary doctorates, and he is now retired from foreign service and acts as a special advisor for the Asia Pacific to the prominent Canadian law firm Heenan Blakey. He is a distinguished fellow of the Asia Pacific Foundation and an honorary research associate at the Institute of Asian Research at the University of British Columbia. We are so thrilled and delighted to have such eminent figures here on this stage this evening, and I hope you will give them a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy, for those generous words. Certainly, they apply fully to MJ. I'm a bit less certain about those that characterize my experience. I, too, would like to congratulate and thank the organizers and sponsors of this year's summer festival, and particularly the series that begins this evening of speakers who will provide the most important input that we have as humans, which is ideas. And I should flag also the prominent role of Shirish, of course, Shirish Rao, and Laura Bispalko in putting all of these pieces together. Thanks for giving me a role. I feel doubly blessed by this privilege because it gives me an opportunity to lead the discussion with my good friend, the incomparable MJ Akbar. There are many advantages to being an ambassador. It's a great job, and I recommend it to anyone who hasn't tried it. And it has many positive dimensions. And one of them is that as an ambassador, you can actually meet anybody that you want to meet in your host country. You can meet politicians and actors and athletes and business people. But the most important people that, and we have other ambassadors here this evening, I'm sure they'll agree, the most important people that you can meet as a diplomat are the thinkers and the writers and indeed the artists who help us put together the pieces of the culture and the dynamism and constraints of the countries where we are posted. And I served as High Commissioner to India for an all too brief 2 years, which was in a way the crowning conclusion of 39 years in the public service. I'd been to India on a few occasions, including in wearing a private sector hat for a while. But living in India provided my first opportunity to truly face India's kaleidoscopic and mind-bending realities with its constant mix of drama, comedy, ambition, and experiences of the human condition. For me, at least, it was all too overwhelming, and I needed, like many people fortunate enough to live and observe India, both the guides and insiders to help me put some of these multifarious pieces together. And by far the most impressive guide that I had the pleasure of getting to know was MJ Akbar, who was two things in particular. One, he was, as you'll see tonight, for those of you who don't know his work, tremendously insightful, but he was also approachable, a combination of talent and character that are not often joined in the same person, as I've discovered. Much to my delight, in addition to finding an incomparable teacher, I would also in due course find a friend. Now, Sandy has provided you with a brief biography, and I'm not going to repeat any points, but add that among his journalistic and writing careers, including a novel, a semi-autobiographical novel, he also served at the Brookings Institution in Washington as a visiting fellow, on a project dealing with U.S. policy towards the Islamic world. Many who read MJ in his weekly commentaries and his books and his articles are impressed by the knowledge that his writings contain, but also very much by his style. Live Mint, I sort of did a bit of research, and Live Mint, which is a well-known organization, news organization in India, including one of my favorite newspapers, which one of the few that MJ didn't edit, called Mint, described his style as having a trademark racy, luminous prose, and I suspect he'll focus on the racy part this evening. The Economist says that he is a stylish writer with an excellent eye for a gag. But what I valued most in his writings and in his briefings to a befuddled diplomat that I was and is very much MJ's profound humanity. Whether writing about heroes or lesser beings, average humans, fools, knaves, what have you, he, in all of his writings, always recognized their humanity as well, their aspirations and their cares. And however foolish in some case were their insights and illusions, he never lost sight of the fact that we all share the planet together. And he brought, as a result, tremendous judgment to his readings and his writings, but he was never judgmental. And I found that to be very, very valuable. I also found tremendous value in the fact that he and I share a tremendous love for single malt Scotch whiskey, and that certainly contributed to our bonne entente, as we say in French. Now, the title of his presentation, if it's still the subject of his presentation tonight, is Tinderbox, the Past and Future of Pakistan. And so I looked up, for the purposes of this evening, what's the definition in the Oxford on Tinderbox. And it's a box containing tinder, flint, and steel to kindle fires. And I thought, this is very appropriate to an issue of Pakistan. The issue of Pakistan, because the tinder includes the difficult social and economic conditions within which the Pakistani people must live, the flint, which produces the spark of public discontent, however, also the steel, which includes the strength of character on which the Pakistanis and their leaders must and indeed will overcome their difficulties. So perhaps with that, they will forge a more equitable, prosperous, and for India, good neighbor Pakistan. However, those are my thoughts. Now it's time to hear those of our speaker, MJ Akbar. We'll do it over there. All right, go ahead.
Come.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, MJ. The floor is yours. So's the bike.
Well, thank you, Joe, for one being so utterly biased. Well, there could be no better beginning to an evening, which I hope will be as convivial as provocative occasionally. I've often wondered, Joe, what makes a foreign country foreign? Particularly, you travel all this distance and you come here. And the easy answer is distance. But I don't think that's a complete answer. In all honesty, today's India is actually closer to North America, America and Canada, than it is to Pakistan. If you had to actually ask an Indian, particularly its middle class, I mean, to be fair, that, in real terms, who is the neighbor of India? I think most people would actually I may not reach it, but say America or Canada rather than Pakistan, because we've become so completely distant from Pakistan. The reasons for this, of course, lie. Let's actually begin our examination of a very difficult subject, complex subject, and I hope as I don't fall into the trap of, as I say, being judgmental. I'm sure that all of us have met Pakistanis and all of us have met Indians. And you come to this extraordinarily startling conclusion that there is no difference between Indians and Pakistanis. And there isn't. We are the same people. So why, over 6 decades, have the two nations diverged along such different paths? India has its share of faults. I mean, God knows it has. And those that God doesn't know about, we as journalists tell you. But why does India seem as if it is evolving towards a horizon? And why does Pakistan seem as if it is sinking into a stagnant swamp? The reason lies not in the character of the Indian and the Pakistani. The reason is, and this is one of the themes of my book, that the idea of India is stronger than the Indian, and the idea of Pakistan is weaker than the Pakistani. Now, having sort of said this dramatic thing, I have to now go around to explain what do I mean by this. What is the idea of Pakistan? Pakistan was created around a notion which has absolutely no relevance and no past. It was built around an idea that a religion could be sufficient as the basis of nationalism. And more specifically, that Islam could be sufficient as a basis for nationalism. Now, I will not actually bore you into the many reasons why the founders of Pakistan, in particular Jinnah, who was one of the persons I admire, actually, greatly. I mean, Jinnah was a genuine hero in the mold that, not least because of a sin, of a common weakness he shared with Joe and me. But when Jinnah, he was a kind of character after he ate his dinners, and those of you who know British law know that if you really want to be a successful barrister in the British system, all you have to do is eat dinner at Lincoln's Inn. But even seriously, after he had eaten his dinners, he still actually wanted to play Romeo at Old Vic. He wanted to be a Shakespearean actor. And till his last days, whenever he felt low, and those who lived, there's one of the things that I learned while I was researching the book, is not to be censorious about this generation. Because they were living at a time when the future was completely in a fog. Today it's easy for us to understand what democracy is all about. We've had 6 decades of experience, but in the 1930s, who knew what this animal democracy would become? Europe was producing Hitler out of democracy. It was producing Mussolini out of democracy. These were their contemporaries, mind you. This is what the news they were reading, that this is what the vote had produced. So who knew what this strange democracy as we know it today did not exist. In France, the women did not have the vote till 49. And so on and so forth. So you can't really go around blaming X or blaming Y for it, but except try and understand. So how did he, and he had repeatedly warned against mixing religion and politics. In fact, he held it against Gandhi, that Gandhi was doing this quite often in his career. So how did this person reach a point where he actually thought? Very interestingly, the clerics, the theologians of Islam, when you think, particularly look at the world of Islam and from the West, from Canada or from America or from Britain, For a variety of reasons, the first and most substantive image that comes to your mind is of the Arab. But the Arab constitutes only 20-25% of the world of Muslims. The largest in the British Raj, the British Empire, used to actually taunt the Caliph, taunt the Turks, and saying, how are you calling yourself the Khalifa or the Caliph? You see, because the largest number of Muslims in the world lived under the British Empire and the British Raj of India, between Afghanistan and Burma. And that really, till today, if you add up the populations, is the largest constituency of Muslims in the world as one broadly ethnic group. So, and the intellectual centers of Islam were also in India, among them being Deoband. In fact, it was the Imams of Deoband who stood up against Jinnah and said that where in the history of Islam have you discovered this notion that religion can be the basis of nationalism? Islam is a brotherhood, it is not a nationhood. Within a few years, within 2 or 3 years of the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Muslims were split politically between Shia and Sunni. And that was a conflict till today, which has nothing to do with religion, by the way. It has nothing to do with the basic tenets of the faith. It is a battle for power. And who shall succeed the Prophet as the Imam or as the leader of the people? All I'm trying to say is that there is no record, no basis. As Maulana Azad pointed out very effectively, he says, well, if religion was sufficient as the basis of nationalism, why would there be 22 Arab countries? They have religion in common. They have language in common. Language is actually a far more relevant basis for nationalism. Whole of Europe is, after all, has been created on the basis of linguistic nationalism. So this argument was there, but alas, in 1937, actually the argument for Pakistan began, I think, on a rational basis, as a search for the security of Muslims in a post-British dispensation, which is perfectly rational. Every minority has a right to worry about its future. So there was nothing. But when you ask that question and raise those issues, then there can always be constitutional answers to such a question. That means you don't have to divide the nation in order to find the answer. But in 1937, particularly in Punjab, when Jinnah lost the argument, because in the first election that was held in 1937, the Muslim League could not get even 2 seats out of the 80 in Punjab. And if it could not survive as a factor among the Muslims of Punjab with separate electorate means that only Muslims could vote for Muslims. If Muslim League could not survive in Punjab, where on earth could it survive? Now comes a very relevant question, which I'm sure all of you, since you all belong to the ruling class, must have experienced in your own lifetimes. What does a lawyer do when he loses the case? He changes the story. And that is what Jinnah did. After 1937, he shifted the story and picked up a strand from the public discourse of the times, shifted the story from the security of Muslims, that means the danger to Muslims, and shifted to Islam in danger. And when he changed the narrative, and Pakistan was created not for Muslims, but for Islam, and that became the basis of the concept that Pakistan was created as a fortress of the faith. Pakistan is the first nation to have been created for a faith rather than for a people. Now, before I come to India, let me link up this. Why have I been arguing for at least 10 years that there was no nation where Osama bin Laden could be found except Pakistan? Despite, even in interviews with me, and I'm sure Joe reported it in that what Pakistan leader says, no, we don't know where he is, and so on. He must be dead, he must be alive, he must be, There were doctors going around in Pakistan saying that we've treated him, but of course, officially, he didn't exist. And I'm sure you realize that the one doctor who helped trace him is the only person who has been convicted in Pakistan and sent off to jail. The alacrity with which they have convicted the person who helped find the most notorious terrorist in living and perhaps future memory gives you an indication of the nature of the state. Now, why would that be? Let me now link this back to another fact. In 2 years' time, we will all be remembering, if we have the courage to remember, which I don't think we do, the fact that the First World War started 100 years ago, now 98 years ago. In the last century has been a very dramatic century. You know, when you think of history, please don't confuse history with our lifetimes. You know, when history is written, we'd be bloody lucky to get a few pages, which constitute our 60, 70, or whatever years, you know, we are blessed with. History has its own pace. And you look back, 100 years is not that very much, you know. But in these 100 years, there have been 4 world wars. 4 world wars. Why were they called world wars? Not because the whole world fought in them. They were called world wars because they were fought for the control of the world. The first, you know. Now, very interestingly, each war segued into the second, into the other, for reasons, for cause and consequence that were deeply related. Now, we all know, it's conventional history now, all school children also know that the Versailles Treaty led to the consequences that led to the Second World War. But don't forget that the Third World War started at the end of the Second World War. The Third World War was the Cold War. And believe me, the Cold War was cold only in Europe. It was very warm elsewhere. It was warm in Southeast Asia, it was warm in South Africa, it was warm in Southern Africa, it was warm in Latin America. And definitely it was very warm in Afghanistan, where it ended. So the Second World War led to the Third World War, and Third World War was a world war, no doubt about it. This time led by the Americans and the Soviet Union. Now, the nature of war changes. The strategies required for victory in the Third World War were as dramatic as the strategies required for the Fourth World War are different from the Third World War. What is the Fourth World War? The Fourth World War began at precisely the spot where the Third ended, Afghanistan, or extended Afghanistan-Pakistan region. War really has no respect for national boundaries. Even those of you who have studied the Vietnam War knew that Vietnam was only one of the nations involved in the war. War finds its own geography. So the Fourth World War actually begins, and this is the war against terrorism. Now, what else is different in this war? This is the first war which is being fought for reasons and for, you know, dreams or objectives that are outside our conventional framework of understanding human behavior. I mean, you can understand wars being fought for empire, wars being fought for national extension of national space. That is what German militarism was all about. Certainly that was Nazism was all about. Nazism was about the extermination of a people, the Jewish people. These are horrific realities, but they are still within the pale of our conventional understanding. The Fourth World War against terrorism was fought, is being fought, between conventional forces on one side, forces in uniform, and therefore who have to be ipso facto obedient to certain legal responsibilities, to accountability. I mean, it is not Abu Ghraib only that is important. What is also important that those who have done it have been exposed by the people, and so on. There's accountability. But on the other side, there are no nations. There is no alliance of nations. There are no armies as we understand it. These are loose militias fighting not even for an ideology. I don't believe the terrorists have an ideology. They only have a medieval discourse and a medieval mindset. And they're looking at objectives that are completely outside the, as I said, the reasonable objective space that we have created. So it's extremely difficult. Now, this war against terrorism, which is being fought, is why indeed have Americans, and I think the whole NATO forces, which fought, the previous 3 wars, in historic terms, there is no greater praise for a war strategy than victory. Each previous war, they have won. Why has the West lost its way in the Fourth World War? 1. Number 2, why is the central battle? This is the other great difference. The central battlefield of the previous 3 wars was Europe. The reason why the Cold War did not become warm in Europe, because the price of getting warm in Europe would have been a nuclear holocaust. That was the only reason. If there had been no nuclear weapons, there would have been armies. Stalin asked the Pope how many divisions he had, and he would have used his divisions. But the other great difference is that the central battlefield of the Fourth World War has shifted from Europe to Pakistan. Why? Because these militias who are fighting a war not in the name of national geographies and so on, but in the name of faith, they can find sanctuary only in a nation created in the name of faith. And that is why they are found there. And that is why they go there. And that is why it is difficult to act against them or to expect even a Pakistan establishment which may genuinely want to move against them. So what really, and I would like to continue the analogy of the Second World War just to give the explanations. Then why has America lost its way? After all, Pakistan is a strategic partner in this war. What is a strategic partnership? A strategic partnership is not, for God's sake, based on the basis of friendship. No. You don't become a strategic partner. Even Canada and America are not strategic partners because they are friends. Stalin and Roosevelt could be strategic partners against Nazi Germany. But the moment their need was over, they shifted into enmity. A strategic partnership is not based on the basis of common friendship, but it is created on the basis of a common enemy. And this is the real problem. Till the Cold War, Pakistan was a legitimate ally of the West, because its commitment against the Soviet Union was as strong as America's commitment against the Soviet Union. In fact, India was not a legitimate partner, because India did not have the same view of the Soviet Union as America had or Pakistan had, and so on and so forth. But in the war against terrorism, Pakistan, America, and Canada do not have the same enemy. And that's where the contradiction lies. In fact, the true strategic partnership of this war is India. Pakistan, and I have said this before, is akin in the Second World War to having a strategic partnership with the Vichy government of Marshal Pétain rather than Charles de Gaulle. If you, or let's say if America had a strategic partnership with Marshal Pétain, why would America be surprised if all the plans for Normandy were handed over to Berlin? So today, why are you surprised if all your plans for Taliban end up on Taliban's desk? Pakistan has a use for Taliban after your withdrawal is over. It needs the Taliban, because for Pakistan, Afghanistan is not merely the strategic space required for its confrontation with India. It is also the desire to create what it calls Islamic space. And this objective of creating an Islamic space, by the way, has been part of Pakistan's policy at least from the time of Ayub Khan and Bhutto. Please don't confuse this that Zia suddenly turned up and created it. In fact, most of the Islamization that has happened in Pakistan has been created by the Bhutto family. Nobody seems to realize that the Taliban was created by Benazir Bhutto, not by Zia. I mean, Zia has many other things which he can claim, much to our regret, but not this. So this really is the real problem that we see in this nature of the war. I just would like to complete, since I did mention the idea of Pakistan, and I said, so what makes India different? What is the idea of India? The idea of India is a tremendously brave idea, particularly given the context and the times in which it was framed. It was framed, our constitution was ready by 1950. And by 1950, what was our record? 3 years of violence, war, shattered, absolutely shattered nations. The psychology of Indians was devastated by partition. And then the physical damage, the physical, the physical damage is too small, to tape it a word.
Destruction.
Destruction, devastation that it caused, particularly along Punjab. Millions dead in the most barbaric civil wars that are possible. Other millions dying of famine in Bengal. I mean, imagine, through that period of economic deprivation, whoever tells you that the British Raj was a great thing for India, please send that person to me. Over the last 50 years of British, the annual growth rate of India was only 1%. In 1750, when the British came to India, and Clive in 1757, I am not making these statistics up. Paul Kennedy's latest book, he teaches at Yale, is there in almost every bookshop. In 1750, India had 24% of world manufacturing output. This is not internet, claims. 24%. China had 31% of world manufacturing. These were the two powerhouses of economic development in the world. Britain had only 1.8%. By 1947, when Clive entered Murshidabad after the Battle of Plassey, he looked around and said, my God, this place is richer than London. Of course it was. What was he surprised at? The British did not come to India because India was a poor country. Nobody conquers a poor country. The return on investment is not sufficient. It came to India because we were a rich country in 1750. By 1947, Britain, I have never seen as neat a description of colonization as this. In 1947, Britain had 24% of world manufacturing output, and India had 1.8. Or 2%, something like that. Absolutely reversal. So, poverty, shattered illusions, dreams, whatever nationalism Gandhi had stood for, broken. And yet, our constitution had the courage to conceive of an idea which the world sneered at. Nobody thought Indian democracy would succeed. Universities in the West were full of academics and writers telling us what a bunch of nonsense we were. It was Pakistan which was considered the rational idea. But why do I call India a modern idea? Modernity has 4 pillars. Number 1, you cannot be a modern nation without democracy. And democracy means equal rights for everyone. Democracy is not the right to vote in elections once in 5 years. Democracy is the right to speak nonsense every day. And it's very important to understand that. I don't speak about anything out of fear. I couldn't care. Because I'm in a democracy. As long as I don't extend this privilege to abuse. Or indeed, as a journalist, extend it to libel. Number 2, You cannot be a modern democracy without equality and freedom of faith. Every faith has a right, irrespective of numbers. If there are only 5 people of a faith, it doesn't matter. They are still equal before the law. They still have total freedom of practice. And nobody has a right. You know, Indians and Christians, Muslims and Christians have lived together as long as Muslims and Hindus. But there is no Dante in India. And please read Inferno in order to understand what I mean. There is no Dante. There is no record of any Hindu poet, sage, essayist, writer, and our history is full of great intellect, be saying one word that is nasty about the Prophet. Similarly, there is no known instance of a Muslim poet, despite Muslims having the protection of political power in the court, saying anything. It's so easy to be nasty about another religion. So easy. It's because all religions have an element of what would be called irrationality. It is not up to me to argue with Christians whether whether Mary was a virgin or not. It is up to Christians to believe that they are. And by the way, as an aside, purely because this might interest you, the Quran not only believes that Mary was a virgin, but actually provides an explanation for it, which the Bible doesn't. Because, Muslims do not extend this belief to the divinity of Jesus. We don't believe that Jesus was divine or Jesus is God. We actually are equal to the Aryan Christianity, which is before the Council of Nicaea. The Trinity actually became the prevailing doctrine after Constantine. So it was, and then therefore the Prophet was asked that if you say that, Jesus was the son of Mary and Mary was a virgin, then how do you say that he's not the son of God? And then the Quran answers, Adam was neither the son of man nor woman, and we still don't call Adam God. It is up to him, the Creator, to create as he wishes. Anyway, my point is, I can believe what I want to believe, you can believe what I want to believe. I have no right to actually treat your belief as inferior. It is up to human beings to believe as they want. Now, in these 2 freedoms is the soul of India. India is not secular because Gandhi was secular. Gandhi was secular because India is secular. And within these 2 freedoms, I often compare India and China. China is a success story, but it is not a modern nation. It doesn't have these 2 freedoms. And in the next 10, 15 years, this will be its biggest problem. The third, you cannot be a modern nation without gender equality. It's impossible. It doesn't matter what was there in the past. A modern nation has to have gender equality. It's very easy to say this in Canada, in Vancouver, which has probably gender equality in reverse. But I'm proud that, the important for me is to say it as I did a few weeks ago when I was asked to address the annual conference of imams and mullahs in India by the largest organization of Deoband. And they also knew what they were doing when they invited me to make this keynote speech. And I also knew what I was doing. And I went and said, and I will use Urdu, I said, anyway, I said, all right, it's, I know what the officially you say, but if you don't treat the girl child as an equal, the way you treat the boy child, I said, forget the 21st century. Nobody will invite you to the 19th century. It's true. So, and you can see the 4th pillar of modernity, of course, is economic equity. that while there's nothing called economic equality, the poorest of the poor must feel that they are part of the rising narrative. That is why I'm so bitterly against these theories and doctrines produced by the World Bank called trickle-down theory. They are the most nasty bit of ideating that I've heard in a long while. What does it mean, trickle-down theory? It means that those who have swimming pools get the waterfall, and those who are dying of thirst are limited to a trickle. That's really what it means. That is what Mitt Romney is all about. So this, and I know I'm very proud of the fact that we in India have succeeded on the first three, but we are still failing on the fourth. And that is the challenge before us. But you see that despite Indians and Pakistanis being the same people, Pakistan is failing so badly on all four. Why? And this is where I say that the idea creates or takes a nation in one direction rather than the other, with the best of will of Pakistan. I don't doubt at all that Zardari or Benazir and so on actually are liberal people, perhaps, and actually would like to see. I mean, Jinnah himself, all he wanted really was, a secular country with a Muslim majority, just as Gandhi wanted a secular country with a Hindu majority. And today, 60 years later, they can't find Jinnah's speech in Pakistan. Officially, they've removed it. They no longer teach it. They don't. President, if they can say, because the first speech he made after getting Pakistan was this. Of course, when I read that speech, I said, if this is what you wanted, why did you have to create Pakistan? However, so, in fact, the prescription for Pakistan is not what I say. I've called Pakistan a jelly state in this book, because a jelly state will continuously quiver. It's not a butter state and it will melt away. It will not disappear. It will remain. The Pakistani army as an institution has enough ability to protect its territorial integrity. But like jelly, it will be unstable. And because it has nuclear weapons and a culture of fundamentalism which is now deeply ingrained, if you want to recognize a country, recognize it through its textbooks and see where it is going. And it will be a toxic jelly state. But ironically, the answer lies not in what I say. I mean, I'm an Indian. I have, the answer lies in rediscovering the Jinnah before 1937. So what Pakistan needs is not another general election, but another constituent assembly, which can take it away and make it into a secular state, which incidentally happens to have a Muslim majority. Have you fallen asleep, Joe, or not?
No, not at all. I don't think anyone has fallen asleep. I'm checking the audience. I promised you a riveting presentation, and we've had it. There is as I read in the book, and some of your writings are very epigrammatic, such as the one you quoted at the outset, where the idea of India is stronger than the Indian, and the idea of Pakistan is weaker than the Pakistani. You've also said that this weakness is in the Pakistani DNA. This is all very deterministic, and short of a reconvening of a constitutional assembly inspired by Jinnah, what are the other scenarios, including positive ones? I've always suspected, and I hope you won't mind if I say this, but deep down I think that you are sometimes an optimist. And so if you can address the issue of the future of Pakistan, leaving room for a degree of optimism about its future, I think we'd find that interesting. But I don't want to dictate what you'd be saying.
No, I think people confuse their understanding of Pakistan, even including in India, when we think of a Pakistan as a danger to India or as a danger to America. That is, for me, a very minor fact. India is now strong enough to look after itself. The days of really military danger are over, including sowing the seeds of secession and so on. The real danger of Pakistan is the danger Pakistan presents to Pakistan itself. 180 million people, who will soon be 200 million people. If a land of 200 million people becomes toxic, then you cannot expect that the environment will remain, oblivious or not be contaminated by it. Now, that's the problem. Now, I could not come to a theory by creating facts. There is nothing in the narrative which I've had to create. It is all part of a track record which is visible. However, if observers do not want to see what is visible, then the fault lies not in the subject, but in the object, but in the subject. I would be happy to be as generous to, my Pakistani cousins or brothers or whatever. But for an accident of history, I'm an Indian Muslim. My mother is a Kashmiri. My father was a Bihari. And it so happened that we were in Calcutta or living in the East. But all my mother's relatives went to Pakistan. Blood brothers, which you kindly referred to, is after all an examination of that relationship. Mm-hmm. And every summer holiday and winter holidays, my mother, who was more desperate to meet her sisters than to live with her husband, at least for some of the year, would just pick us up from school and off we would go to Lahore, because in those days this visa regime and so on had not become such a frozen reality. And so we spent with our cousins there for 3 months, 4 months. Why would I wish them ill? But if I go there and I find that everyone in Pakistan has a foreign bank account, that their own confidence in their own state is becoming fragile, that sometimes their desperation to see the positive actually takes them towards aggression, and even in discourse. Then I said, look, there's no point now blaming India. Ask yourself a question, and I'm asking you to ask yourself a question. Why, in a nation created for the security of Muslims, are more Muslims being killed each day than in the rest of the Muslim world put together? Why? You can't blame anymore that Sikhs are killing you. You can't say anymore that Hindus are killing you. It's fellow Muslims are killing Muslims. Why? Not because Muslims were born murderers, but because the nature of the state has created mafias which are in the name of faith. They've created a culture of mass murder for which nobody is ever held accountable. Shall I narrate the number of jihadi groups who have conducted massacres and are walking around? America has offered $10 million for Hafiz Saeed. And what happens in Pakistan? Everybody laughs. Or rises to the defense of somebody who has been convicted, literally, of being a terrorist by the United Nations. And yet, I don't understand this, frankly. Why this sense of generosity is being provided, not to Pakistan, but to people who are terrorists and declared terrorists. This extremely important event has taken place, which unfortunately, this happened about 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Extremely important event. And which has really not been reported as yet. I can't understand why. There are enough journalists, Canadian journalists and American journalists. Saudi Arabia, when you were kind enough to mention a little bit of what I was doing, what I've done. In 2005 or something, 6, King Abdullah invited me to be one of the members of a 20-member group to write the agenda for the future of the Muslim world. And this conference took place in Mecca. Therefore, symbolically, he had raised this meeting. So, I've seen Saudi Arabia And, two nations, if ever two nations have been not only ideologically together, but tremendous strategic partners. After all, look at what the Saudi-Pakistani partnership has achieved. If you look at it, they fought together against the Soviet Union. Tremendous partnership. They've created Taliban. Never forget that only 3 nations recognize Taliban: Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and UAE. Iran did not recognize Taliban. So, in any case, you can add to. And this strategic partnership, for the first time, has cracked under the pressure of the Fourth World War, which is the war on terror. Because Saudis have handed over one of the principal accused of the Mumbai terrorist attack, a chap who worked with the Lashkar-e-Toiba, which is Hafiz Sayed, who was in the control room directing. Abu Jundal, his name is actually, he's defected from India and went there. And he's been handed over by the Saudis. It has shocked what might be called the underclass of terrorism, because they again had assumed in their mind that there would be safe sanctuary in Saudis. And the Saudis knew that handing over to India, you can imagine it was going to blow apart the Pakistan defense on that they had no involvement. Because this chap is singing like all the birds of Vancouver put together. He's providing evidence of ISI involvement. It's all there. I'm sure Dennis Headley, he's provided similar evidence, but with less knowledge, because Headley had little less to do. So even Saudis are telling their friends, it is not that the Saudi-Pakistan relation is going to collapse. Not at all. They will remain the most important allies for each other. But even the Saudis are telling Pakistan, enough. But Washington can't find the ability to say so. Ottawa can't find the ability to say so, which puzzles me deeply. I don't get emotional about these things. But it does puzzle me, because where is your understanding of your self-interest? Riyadh has understood its self-interest. And for me, the Saudi king is not just the king of Saudi Arabia, he's the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, and therefore has a standing in the Muslim world, which has much larger than it's just control of one more nation. So why is this, why are the countries that constitute NATO unable to understand that you're dealing with Marshal Patel?
I'd like to ask you one question on India, and then I'm going to ask Professor Michael Byers to come to the podium and open discussion more broadly. But the 4 fundamental principles of modernism, democracy, rights, equality, and economic equality. You've said quite rightly that India has achieved very much the first 3. But has so far failed on the 4th. Can you talk a bit about the politics of the 4th and why that's particularly difficult, seemingly, to achieve?
No, it's not impossible to achieve. One of the reasons for the optimism that you were searching in vain for is not because Indian politicians have suddenly sprouted wings under their armpits instead of our normal human hair. It is because the pressure of democracy. The real story of India in the last 10 years is that the political rewards are coming to good governance. And the poor are defining good governance by a very simple arithmetic. The poor are not unrealistic. The poor are not fools. Just because they are illiterate, it doesn't mean they're foolish. We middle-class people have absolutely no understanding of the psychology or mentality of poor people, because we don't meet them, we don't talk to them. They are a floating entity as far away from our lives as they possibly can manage, because they're a disturbing presence. Poverty is the most insulting and degrading reality in life. Hunger in particular. But, the person who's poor, He does not think that if he started his life in a hovel, he will end up in a palace. But he does have a right to believe and demand that if he started his life with 2 pieces of bread, he must end his life with 4. And if a society and a nation cannot provide it, then the society has failed. But today he's taking his revenge. He measures governance by rice, bread, education in particular, because he knows that the magic of future, his life is gone, let us say, but the life of his child still remains left. And the child is only going to be rescued by the revolution of education, nothing else. And particularly now, English education, or an education in English. So this, and it is waking governments up. Why is Bihar improving? The same set of politicians, because they know they can no longer use the traditional antagonisms, hatreds, emotions of caste and community to come to power. They have to deliver with infrastructure and so on and so forth. So this is where you can see the power of healing power of democracy, and why you can have reasons for optimism beyond the venality of politicians.
Thank you very much. Michael?
I just wanted to explain that we have a very special guest tonight, Professor Michael Byers. Johal, thanks for inviting Michael, and we thought that Michael would be able to provide some comments, and thank you so much for joining us from across the waters.
Thank you. It's a very great pleasure to be here tonight. I'm going to follow the model of Ambassador Caron and keep my involvement very brief, because we've been treated to a remarkable intellect this evening, and I'm the only person standing between you and him in terms of questions from the floor. Let me just say that I have read this book, Tinderbox, the last couple of days, and it is a tour de force, a remarkable analysis and explanation, and also a very powerful set of opinions. I didn't know MJ Akbar before this evening, but I liked him very much. This book spans centuries. It puts forward possible solutions in a region and a country, Pakistan, where solutions are sometimes hard to find. I'm going to give the first question to a very special man, also from India, Milun Kathari, the former United Nations Special Rapporteur on housing, who we have the great privilege of also having here in Vancouver tonight. Milun.
Thanks very much, Michael, and good evening, MJ. I had a couple of questions, actually. I spoke here yesterday about the situation of human rights in India, but I was interested in how you opened your talk this evening, speaking about how distant we are as middle-class Indians from our neighbors, and we're closer to the Western countries. But I think one of the positive developments in the last 10 or 15 years regarding India and Pakistan has been this very vibrant Indo-Pak people's dialogue. Right? There have been artists, media people, human rights activists that have been actively engaging. And the question I have is, what do you think of that? I mean, do you think there's a future in that kind of an exchange where we can actually assist each other in terms of what needs to be done in our countries? And that brings me just very quickly to my second question, where you were laying out the 4 foundations of a democracy, and one was rights, the other was the economic equity. But those are very connected, because in my understanding, the assessment we've done of the human rights situation in India, it's actually rapidly deteriorating. I would completely disagree with you that we have achieved that. We have huge problems in the country, including growing insurgency. Of course, we're very far away from the state Pakistan is in, but don't you see that as a danger as well? Thank you.
Let me address the growing insurgency first. I was in college in presidency in 67, 70, And the Presidency College's canteen was full of young men with a price on their heads. They were Maoists who thought that Chairman Mao was their chairman. Today's Maoist insurgency is an insurgency, but it is not Maoist. It is, in fact, and I've written this, I've not... it is in a sense, and of course I didn't become very deeply popular by saying so, a legitimate cry of a hungry belly. If you have not given your tribals, some hope in 60 years, what do you expect them to do? In fact, when I speak to Indian audiences, and I said, those of you who think that these Maoists are wrong, just come and let's have a discussion after 2 days during which you have eaten nothing. Just come back to these under these chandeliers, but don't eat for 2 days. Then let me see what your views become. But, and the problem here, the dilemma, is that because this, I think, a legitimate demand for some form of parity or improvement is accompanied by gunfire. So therefore the state responds, as you well know, against gunfire with parallel or even excessive response of gunfire. And we, within media or something, we know we do our best to expose the state and so on. But when it comes to the nub, it doesn't leave me a pessimist at all. Because this is part of what I call the reality of the dialectic of a democracy. Very few nations have, why do we forget, when we take positions? We have to have a comparative view. Because as you know, no fact is an absolute in itself. How can we forget that between 1943 and 1944 and 1945, when Hitler was killing 6 million Jews, 3 to 4 million Bengalis were dying of hunger. That was the nation which that generation inherited. I did my first sort of reporting, trying to earn 5 rupees or something. Bihar famine. That is where we've emerged. At least as a nation now, famine has been removed from the reality of India. I'm not saying hunger has been removed, but famine has been removed. I'd be the last one to go around with a drumbeat of success. On the other hand, I would be doing my country an injustice if I did not recognize that given where we started from, in 65 years, we are not as badly off as we might have been. Were it not for the other realities that have guided. Certainly, without democracy, we would not have been able to do anything. We would have just been, in classic terms, classic Marxist terms, running dogs of imperialism. That is what we would have been. But the fact is that, now, again on your Pakistan question, whatever is happening is far better than not happening. But it doesn't address the reality of the problem. There is no point saying that cancer can be treated with Band-Aid. It may sort of, you look at the cancer is visible through a sore or whatever it is, something. You can't put a Band-Aid over it and say that there is no cancer. It requires deeper medicine. And that is the problem. The problem is that, we also forget that till 1965, there was hardly a visa. There was total communication between the two nations. We can't ignore the fact of Mumbai, can we? So it isn't as if, look, India no longer, it did have a problem with Pakistan. But at least one of the great developments in this, you will understand as a foreign policy practitioner, your long, and tremendously, powerful career. One of the great developments I've seen is the conversion of India, which went through 62 and 65. India has become a status quo power. It no longer has any realistic desire for anyone else's territory. If you take a vote in India today and say that, all right, let's settle Kashmir over the ceasefire line, everybody will be very happy. Very happy. We don't want the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir anymore. We don't want Aksai Chin on the China border. We just don't. There was a time when I started my career when we used to fight with Bangladesh, for God's sake, over little bits of 3 bigha and so on, little parcels of time. We don't want it anymore. We are actually we give the largest amount of our most precious asset called water to our neighbors. All the water fundamentalists like Brahmachalani and so on, get very angry. What the hell are you doing? You need water for your own country. And water wars are just around the corner. But there it is. So we are in that sense. But the status quo power also means that what we have, we will not give any of it. There is no way anyone is going to remove India from Siachen. So it is within this dynamic that the reality will evolve. And I mean, we have to accept that realism has its own problems and demands. And it is not optimism or pessimism which eventually guides a nation. It is realism. Fortunately, our realism is embedded, that is really good fortune, in the idealism of a generation which is long gone. If this generation had to create a constitution, I don't know what it would have created. It would have probably created basic rights for telecom industry. Fundamental rights.
All right. Next question towards the top in the middle, man with the white jacket. Yes, please. Microphone is coming to you.
This question, actually, I've been trying to answer myself for the last 5 years, and I don't have an answer to this. And I think you are the best person today to answer it. I've been wanting to understand the place for the phenomena called Narendra Modi in the future of India. You know, of all the mistakes that this person has made, has he improved? Does he have a place, actually has a legitimate place in the future of India, and how?
One thing is undeniable, that Narendra Modi has a place in the present of India. No, I'm trying to address a difficult question. Now, let me say something that I'm trying to be objective. No, I need to be. Over having reported my own country for now 40 years, I've seen enough violence. One of the books, my books is called Riot After Riot. So there's no shortage of having watched people being killed in front of me. 1984 also happened. I was there in Delhi when Sikhs were being killed.
72 hours, there was no cops in the...
Nowhere, nothing. It was all managed by the political party. And yet things evolved. The Sikhs voted for Congress. At least under Narendra Modi, the Indian system today has held a large number of people, convicted them within 10 years. Not a single person has been convicted for the 1984 riots. Not one. They have elected Sajjan Kumar, or whatever his name is. But they can't find him to arrest him. So there is a lot of, I've seen many things in our experience. And I've seen things evolve and change. So I'm not certain that this will also not evolve. I don't know. I hope it doesn't evolve too easily. But within the framework, one thing that is definite, that there is no previous riot in which the perpetrators of the riot have been chased by the system and held accountable by the system. And that, for me, is really the one great positive development. Media, television, judiciary. After all, no riot can happen without the collusion of the police and the collusion of political parties. We know that. right? So this time, it's no longer. No one, the lesson of Gujarat is that no one can afford a Gujarat anymore. There's another great reality of India. Up to 90, there was hardly a season in which I was not rushing her off to cover some riot, Hindu-Muslim riot. Do you know that since 1991, there's been no Hindu-Muslim riot? And even Gujarat is an extension of the Babri riots. So India's mind, India has discovered the miracle of common sense.
Okay. Yes, there's a woman in the third row. Please wait for the microphone. And then I'm going to go to the gentleman with the strong arm.
tonight.
Sorry, gentlemen. Sorry.
There's a minor error of gender, but...
The light is very poor from up here.
That's fine. Sir, we enjoyed your talk very, very much. About Pakistan, if things are to change there, someone needs to be in charge. One gets the sense that it's like a Wild West, sort of a frontier town with a government barely sort of hanging on by its fingernails, the ISI sort of running a parallel control system, several militias, warlords, and then, of course, Afghanistan, and now the Taliban. Do you see any kind of resolution of this situation of power being spread between so many entities?
It's not the leaders of Pakistan who will change Pakistan. It is the people of Pakistan. And, again, when we look at the history of Pakistan, let me use the word again. A major miracle took place, which has not been sufficiently understood. Actually, if you look at it, Pakistan was two wings, Bengal and Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan frontier, west and east. Actually, in western Pakistan, there was no serious record of Hindu-Muslim animosity. The real animosity between Hindus and Muslims was in Bengal. Not only for, 1/3 of all the Muslims in United India lived in Bengal. Number two, because of British policies and the fact that the British capital was in Calcutta, and therefore the revenue generation system was primary from Bengal. Everything boils down eventually to money.
Exactly.
And their revenue system, they created a new class of rentiers, which is through the permanent settlement, which converted the original Muslim landowners, particularly in what is East Bengal, into a landless peasantry. Really. So there was the anger of land, there was the anger of resentment and change and fear, all the various components that can add up to a very toxic mix. That Bengal, which led in much more than Punjab, even if you look at 37 elections, led the movement for Pakistan. 52% of Pakistan was Bengali. 52% of Pakistan who are fully Muslims. You can't say they are anti-Islamic. They're as Muslim as anyone, in fact, more Muslim if in many senses. They rejected the idea of Islam as a basis of nationalism and reinvented Bengal on the basis of linguistic ethnic. Right? That was also a miracle in terms of historical achievement. So if 52% can do it because of what they see, that the reality is melting, then I'm sure that 48% on the other side will also. But as Maulana Azad said so accurately, he said for it to happen, it will require a great crisis. A great crisis.
One more question just up here.
Namaskar, Adab. I'm going to ask this question in Hindi because I think it's just appropriate for me, and then I'll translate that in English. मुसलमानों को तो पाकिस्तान मिल गया, हिंदुओं को हिंदुस्तान मिल गया, लेकिन सिंधियों को तो सिंध भी नहीं मिला. Was there no leader from Sindh that ever said that they needed to create their own little entity?
I'm sorry don't mind my saying so, but this question has so many inbuilt contradictions which can be exposed immediately. When you say Sindhi and then you say Hindu and Muslim, Sindhis are both Muslims and Hindus. And why would they? Number two, Hindus did not get India. Secular people got India. I don't live in a Hindu Rashtra. And the day my country, India, becomes a religious Rashtra, it will suffer the same fate as Pakistan. So Muslims and Hindus and Sindhis and Christians and Jews and Sikhs and everyone got India, for better or for worse. So I think it is wrong to get into that immediate transference of equation.
I think we saw in the response to that last question the fearless cogency of MJ Akbar. I'm going to end the questions there because there are books to be signed and a reception to be had. And our guest has worked very hard this evening. It's been a remarkable display. You have my greatest admiration. You have indeed identified that Pakistan is at the center of the Fourth World War. We know this in Canada. Our soldiers have been fighting in Afghanistan for more than a decade, and it's only recently that we've realized that the core of that conflict is in fact across the border in Pakistan. You're learning your expertise, your insight, your grasp of history is very powerful and much needed. You've been moderated very capably by your friend Joseph Caron, and I'd like everyone to join me in thanking the two of them for a truly remarkable evening.